What's the craziest way you've seen someone get fired? They were promised titles, stipends, and a seat at the future of culture. 3 days after launch, their contracts expired and their careers vanished. A few years ago, I worked for a mid-sized museum that suddenly decided it was going fully digital. They made it sound glamorous. Innovation, global access, the future of culture. They held town halls with dramatic lighting and inspirational music like it was a product launch. The people hit hardest were the archivists. These were lifers, folks who had spent decades cataloging artifacts, handwriting restoration notes, memorizing the provenance of items no one else even knew existed. Management announced a special task force to help transition the collection into an interactive online platform. The archivists were told they were uniquely qualified. They'd lead the charge. Temporary stipends, fancy new titles, strategic initiative, all that language. What they weren't told, participation required signing a role conversion agreement. It sounded harmless. HR framed it as paperwork to free up budget lines for the project. What it actually did was dissolve their existing permanent roles and reclassify them as project-based consultants. They were flattered. They felt chosen. Some even turned down outside offers because they believed this was recognition. For 6 months, they worked brutal hours digitizing collections, writing metadata, recording video lectures, basically pouring their institutional memory into servers. They trained the younger hires how to maintain everything once it launched. The launch event was huge. Press coverage, donors, applause. The director publicly thanked the transition team for their sacrifice and vision. 3 days later, their consultant contracts expired. Security badges deactivated automatically at midnight. No one even had to escort them out. They showed up Monday morning thinking there'd be renewals. Instead, HR sent a group email thanking them for their transformative contribution and reminding them their agreements had concluded as scheduled. There were no permanent archivist roles left to return to. Those had been eliminated months earlier under a restructuring. The museum kept all the digitized content, of course. It became a subscription platform that generated way more revenue than the old physical archives ever did. One of the archivists tried to contest it, arguing she hadn't understood she was surrendering her permanent status. Legal pointed to the signed conversion clause. Story 2. She survived a brain injury, built a spotless record, and then HR told her her voice didn't fit the company image. 3 minutes later, everything changed. I worked at a regional shipping brokerage, pure back office grind. Tracking numbers, invoices, customs forms. No customer interaction. You could go months without speaking to anyone outside your team. There was a woman on our floor named Maribel, late 40s, quiet, efficient. She had survived a serious neurological event a few years before I met her. It left one side of her body stiff and her speech slow and slightly slurred. Not hard to understand, just deliberate, careful. She typed with one hand faster than most of us could with two. No one cared. The job was data reconciliation, accuracy over speed. She was one of the cleanest processors we had. Then corporate hired a new operations director who wanted to rebrand the client experience. Suddenly, we weren't just processors. We were relationship stewards. That meant periodic video check-ins with vendors. Mandatory. Cameras on. They made a big deal about inclusivity and adaptability. Posters went up about embracing change. A week before the rollout, Maribel was called into a closed-door meeting with HR and the new director. It lasted maybe 5 minutes. She came back pale, didn't sit down, just gathered her bag with her good hand. Someone asked if she was okay. She said, very clearly despite the tremor, "They said my condition could be misinterpreted on camera." That was it. Apparently, the director had framed it as protecting the company's brand consistency. They claimed vendors might perceive her speech pattern as unprofessional or impaired. They offered her a graceful exit package if she chose to resign before the video policy went live. If she didn't, they'd have to evaluate whether she could meet the essential communication standards of the revised role. Her original job description had never required live interaction. She refused to resign. Story 3. For a $50 mistake, the GM staged a public firing in the middle of a dodgeball match, and the crowd thought it was entertainment. Years ago, I worked at a family entertainment center. Arcades, laser tag, greasy pizza, the whole sensory nightmare. Saturdays were chaos. Birthday parties stacked on top of each other. Kids screaming, machines eating tokens. One of the floor attendants, Darren, was 19. Sweet guy, not the sharpest, but harmless. He mostly restocked prizes and unstuck skee ball tickets. It was a minimum wage gig he used to pay for community college classes. One Saturday night, we hosted a local amateur dodgeball league in the indoor court area. Management loved renting it out because it brought in big food orders. The general manager, Todd, was obsessed with making examples of staff who embarrassed the brand. Darren's crime? He forgot to lock the prize counter during a rush. A couple of teenagers slipped behind it and pocketed some cheap plastic junk before anyone noticed. Total loss was maybe $50. Todd was furious, not because of the money, because it happened on his watch during a busy event. Instead of pulling Darren aside, Todd waited. During halftime of the dodgeball match, Todd grabbed the microphone that was usually used for announcing scores. He called Darren's name over the speakers and told him to step onto the court. Everyone assumed it was a joke or some kind of game. Todd asked Darren, in front of maybe 60 players and spectators, to explain what basic responsibility meant. Darren looked confused, thought he was being quizzed. Then Todd announced that negligence had consequences and that the company had a zero-tolerance policy for incompetence. He told Darren he was terminated effective immediately and instructed him to hand over his staff lanyard. People started laughing because they still thought it was staged. It wasn't. Darren's face went red. He tried to say he'd fix it, that it wouldn't happen again. Todd cut him off and told him to clear his locker before the next round started. Security, who normally just checked wristbands, escorted him across the arcade floor while kids were redeeming tickets and parents were eating pizza like nothing was happening. The dodgeball game resumed 10 minutes later like it was a sponsored segment. Story 4. We thought our off-the-record Slack was safe until one screenshot cost 2 people their jobs and shattered the entire office overnight. I used to work for a logistics software company. Open office, glass walls, forced transparency culture. Leadership loved buzzwords about trust and collaboration. There was a private Slack workspace everyone used to vent. Not the official company Slack. The unofficial one employees created because the real one felt too monitored. It was invite-only, off-company email addresses, supposedly safe. One afternoon, a developer named Ian posted a sarcastic meme about our department head. Nothing extreme, just poking fun at how she'd canceled deadlines and then blamed the team for missing them. A handful of laughing reactions, a few comments agreeing. Someone in that private group screenshotted it. The next morning, Ian was pulled into a meeting. No warning, no performance issues prior. He'd actually just gotten a bonus the quarter before. When he came back out, he didn't sit down. He just grabbed his backpack and unplugged his keyboard. Turns out the screenshot had been forwarded up the chain. HR claimed his comments demonstrated hostile intent toward leadership and violated the company's values policy, even though it happened outside official systems, on personal accounts, off the clock. People were stunned. Most of us were in that same Slack group. 2 days later, another employee from marketing was called in. Her only involvement? She had replied to Ian's meme, with accurate though. She was terminated for endorsing disruptive behavior. That's when panic set in. Everyone started deleting accounts, leaving group chats, scrubbing social media. Trust evaporated overnight. Story 5. Our handheld scanners logged out at the exact same second, and within minutes, dozens of workers were handed envelopes and marched past forklifts like inventory. I was working at a subscription meal kit warehouse a few years back. Big open floor, scanners chirping all day, conveyor belts humming. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid steady and most of us depended on it. One Wednesday afternoon, right in the middle of a shift, everyone's handheld scanners logged out at the exact same time. We thought it was a system crash. It happened occasionally. Then the overhead lights cut to half power. Not darkness, just dim enough to make it unsettling. Supervisors started walking down the aisles telling specific people to step away from their stations and wait near the loading dock. No explanation, no raised voices, just clipped instructions and tight smiles. At first it looked random, then we realized it wasn't. Every person pulled aside had been hired within the last year. They lined up maybe 50 of them by the dock doors. Pallets stacked behind them. Forklifts idling nearby like this was just another part of operations. The rest of us were told to resume work. From my station, I could see HR standing with a clipboard near the exit. One by one, people were handed envelopes. No meeting, no group announcement, just a short sentence and a gesture toward the side door. Security guards, who usually only checked inventory trucks, were posted outside. One of the packers, Alina, had brought her newborn to the office the week before so everyone could see him. She was still on partial leave and picking up shifts when she could. She was on that line by the dock. She kept asking if there had been a mistake mistake because she'd signed up for overtime that weekend. There wasn't a mistake. They said seasonal adjustment, even though it was April and we were busier than ever. What made it worse was how quiet it all was. No dramatic speech, no mass announcement, just conveyor belts running while people disappeared in batches. Story 6. An entire design team was erased in one silent Monday meeting, and the last woman standing was kept just long enough to hand over everything before being cut. I was at a small architectural firm when everything started tightening up financially. Projects slowed. Budgets got scrutinized. The partners kept insisting we were stable, and that transparency was important. One Friday afternoon, several designers were invited to a mandatory strategy briefing scheduled for Monday morning. Calendar invite marked future planning. No details. Monday came. Half the studio filed into the conference room. The rest of us stayed at our desks, confused but relieved. After about 20 minutes, the people inside started trickling out one by one. Nobody said anything. They just grabbed their bags and left. No goodbyes, no dramatic scenes, just silent exits. By noon, nearly the entire mid-level design team was gone. Only one senior project coordinator remained from that group, Claire. She'd been there almost 10 years, knew every client, every permit office, every vendor. She was told she was critical continuity and that the firm needed her stability to carry remaining projects forward. For 2 weeks, Claire absorbed everyone else's workload. 12-hour days. She rewrote schedules, reassured clients, trained 2 newly hired junior staff members who'd conveniently started the same week the others were dismissed. She joked about being the last survivor. She seemed exhausted but grateful to still have a paycheck. Then one Wednesday afternoon, the partners called her into the same conference room. 15 minutes later, she walked out with her eyes glassy and her laptop tucked under her arm. Turns out the junior staff she'd been training weren't additions. They were cheaper replacements. The firm had kept her temporarily to transition client relationships and document internal systems. Once everything was neatly handed over, they eliminated her role under the same restructuring umbrella. She didn't even get to finish the projects she'd salvaged. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. Story 7. After juggling court hearings and rehab for her injured brother, she showed up to work, only to discover she'd been quietly deleted from the system. There was a woman on my team named Denise, mid-50s, calm voice, patient with angry callers. She'd recently become the legal guardian of her younger brother after he'd had a major accident. Court hearings, rehab appointments, insurance chaos. She was juggling everything and still logging in every day, even if she looked like she hadn't slept. She'd been late a handful of times, missed a couple shifts for paperwork related to the guardianship. She always submitted documentation. Management kept saying they understood. One Monday, she walked in carrying a thermos and her usual stack of printed notes. Sat down, put on her headset. Her login wouldn't connect. She tried again. Reset password. Nothing. She flagged down IT. They checked the system and looked confused. Her employee ID wasn't active, not locked, not needs reset, just not there. While she was still on hold with IT, our supervisor came over and asked her to step into a side office. The rest of us kept taking calls, pretending we couldn't hear. 10 minutes later, Denise came back out holding a single sheet of paper. No envelope, no box, just one page. Apparently, over the weekend, HR had processed a separation due to attendance reliability concerns. They'd removed her from payroll effective Sunday night. No warning, no final meeting scheduled in advance. They let her show up, try to log in, and find out through a system error. What made it worse was that the weekly schedule had been updated the night before. Her name was gone from every future shift. The space where her name used to be was just blank. She kept saying, "I just needed another month to get things stable." They told her the company required consistent availability. By lunch, her extension was reassigned. Her voicemail greeting deleted. A few months later, I heard through a former coworker that she'd taken a position with a nonprofit that coordinates medical transport for people in recovery. Apparently, she's thriving there. Story 8. HR eliminated my position Tuesday morning. Without realizing, I was the only person who could restore the hospital's crashed network. I worked at a regional hospital's IT department. Our team was small, and I was the lead on maintaining the network and critical systems. Everyone depended on me, but management liked to make decisions that made zero sense. One Tuesday morning, I was pulled into a meeting with the HR director and the head of operations. They closed the door and informed me that my position was being eliminated. No warning, no No discussion, just a sudden restructure. They offered me a transition plan where I could hand off my responsibilities over the next 2 weeks. I agreed reluctantly because I knew that in healthcare IT, disappearing without a proper handover would have catastrophic consequences. Here's the twist. The hospital had just experienced a major outage overnight. Critical lab machines, patient record systems, even the paging system were offline. I was the only person who could fix it. They hadn't realized, or didn't care, that letting me go immediately would mean nobody could restore the systems. So, while they thought they were forcing me out, I stayed. I patched servers, restored the network, and ensured that patient care systems were back online. All while their HR rep kept asking if I'd considered resigning early. For 2 full days, I was technically terminated, but physically the only person who could prevent chaos. The head of operations tried to do some of my work himself. He lasted an hour before calling me begging for help. In the end, I left on my own terms, having documented everything and trained the remaining junior staff so the hospital wouldn't collapse. HR probably thought they'd humiliated me, but honestly, it felt like I'd won. Story 9. Working hard and keeping things tidy got him terminated. Apparently, cleanliness while friend of mine, Jordan, worked nights at a small, independently owned bakery. He was one of those rare employees who genuinely cared. Always early, always volunteering for extra shifts, and meticulous about keeping the kitchen spotless. The bakery had a problem. The day staff never bothered to sweep up crumbs or wipe down counters properly. By the time Jordan arrived for his night shift, the place looked like a war zone of flour and sugar. So he cleaned it up before starting his prep work. No one ever told him not to. Management didn't even notice most nights. One evening, the owner happened to swing by unexpectedly, catching Jordan wiping down the main prep table and sweeping the floor. The owner immediately demanded to know why he was interfering with the normal workflow and accused him of overstepping his responsibilities. Jordan explained politely that he was just making sure the kitchen was safe and ready for baking. Owner didn't care. He fired him on the spot. Right there. No warning, no prior discussion, just you're done. Later, Jordan found out the real issue. The owner didn't want the kitchen looking too clean because he liked to show new customers behind the scenes and claimed it made the bakery feel authentic. Any hint that someone actually cared about hygiene was apparently a punishable offense. Afterward, the owner instituted a ridiculous rule. Staff were forbidden from touching anything that wasn't explicitly assigned to them. Crumbs, spills, even broken equipment had to be left exactly where it was until the owner or his son came in to deal with it themselves. A punishable offense. Story 10. A new hire thought shelving books was beneath him. One sentence later, he was gone. Years ago, I worked at a small, independent bookstore. Everyone pitched in when needed. Restocking, cashiering, helping customers. It was a tight team, and the manager led by example. One new hire, a guy straight out of college with a literature degree, acted like he'd arrived at the pinnacle of his career. He spent most shifts leaning against the counter, reading poetry, or correcting other employees' shelving techniques. One evening, during a particularly busy shift, I asked him to help finish restocking the new shipment of books. He looked at me like I'd asked him to shovel dirt with his bare hands and said, "I have a degree in literature. I am not a stock boy. That is beneath me." I paused, smiled, then calmly said, "You're right. That is beneath you. So this isn't your job anymore. You're done." It wasn't just that moment. He had been gradually undermining coworkers, insisting he knew better about display layouts, cataloging, and customer recommendations. He refused to help in the reading corner, ignored requests to tidy common areas, and argued with staff over trivial details like where biographies should go. Firing him was instant. No warnings, no HR meetings, just a single sentence and a shake of the head. The rest of the team cheered quietly when he left. Morale went up immediately. Story 11. A few years back, I managed a small municipal records office. One of my junior clerks, Alex, was one of the kindest people I'd ever worked with, always smiling, helping everyone, genuinely caring about the community we serve. Unfortunately, paperwork and deadlines weren't his strong suit. Mistakes kept piling up, and the rest of the team was constantly cleaning up after him. When I got promoted into the supervisory role, I inherited the problem. My predecessor had warned me, "You'll need to let him go eventually." I stalled, gave him extra training, paired him with a mentor, and even shuffled some of his duties to less critical tasks. Alex tried so hard. He really did. You could see it in the way he stayed late and double-checked everything. But it never stuck. Eventually, higher management stepped in. They said it wasn't fair to the rest of the office for me to keep bending rules and covering his mistakes. I dreaded the conversation. When we finally told Alex, he looked genuinely shocked. He said quietly, "I thought I was finally getting it right." His voice cracked. He had no family nearby, no safety net. Escorting him out of the building felt like dragging someone through mud. mud. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just walked slowly, clutching his bag, as if he were walking out of his entire life. I went back to my desk and couldn't focus for the rest of the day. You think firing someone is about punishing the incompetent, but sometimes it's about letting go of a genuinely good person who, through no fault of their own, just can't meet the demands. Story 12. A loyal employee bent one rule to save a sale, and a district auditor who just happened to walk in ended her decade-long career. Back in college, I worked at a massive electronics superstore. It was the kind of place with endless fluorescent lighting, towering steel shelves in the stockroom, and managers obsessed with shrink reports and safety metrics. Staffing was always razor thin. On this particular Saturday, we were slammed. One floor associate covering 3 departments, one cashier, and a supervisor who had disappeared into the office to handle numbers. A guy came in furious because another branch had told him we had the last high-end gaming monitor in the region. He'd driven almost an hour. Of course, the box was somewhere in the overhead inventory racks in the warehouse. The only person certified to operate the lift that day was Sandra. Late 40s, former military, took pride in doing things by the book. She'd been there over a decade. She gets on the lift, raises up to the top rack, and realizes the pallet had been loaded badly. The monitor box was wedged behind other freight. Technically, policy said you needed a second certified associate below to guide and stabilize the load. We didn't have one. The customer was pacing, threatening to cancel the purchase and blast the store online. Sandra looked down at us, sighed, and said, "I've got it." Instead of lowering the whole pallet and reworking it the long way, which would have taken 30 to 40 minutes and blocked the aisle, she carefully shifted one of the lighter boxes aside while still elevated. Not reckless, not dramatic, just trying to free the product. Right as she pulled the monitor loose, the district safety auditor walked into the warehouse unannounced. He watched the whole thing from the aisle entrance. Sandra brought the lift down smoothly, handed the monitor off, and the customer left happy, thanking her for actually giving a damn. The auditor didn't say a word until the customer was gone. Then he told her she had violated elevated work protocol by adjusting freight without a second spotter. Zero tolerance. Immediate termination. 10 years of spotless reviews. Gone. Story 13. 15 years of loyalty ended not with a thank you, but with a termination processed while he was on a stretcher. My brother used to work at a large distribution warehouse. Concrete floors, conveyor belts, constant noise. Everything was tracked by the minute. Scan times, break lengths, productivity percentages. Management worshipped metrics. There was an older guy on his team named Raymond. Late 50s, quiet, dependable, the kind of employee who never complained and always volunteered for overtime when shipments got backed up. He'd been there over 15 years. One night during peak season, Raymond collapsed near the loading dock. Not dramatic at first. He just sat down hard, like he'd lost balance. Then he started clutching his chest. People rushed over. Someone called emergency services. One supervisor tried to keep everyone else working, yelling that standing around would hurt the numbers. While Raymond was still on the floor, pale and struggling to breathe, the operations manager was on his phone with HR. Not to check on him, to confirm his employment status. See, Raymond had recently been moved to a performance improvement plan because his pick rate had slowed down. Age catching up, probably. Management had been building a case to terminate him for not meeting quotas. While paramedics were stabilizing him, HR pulled up his file and processed a termination citing failure to meet operational benchmarks. By the time the stretcher rolled past the time clocks, his badge had already been deactivated in the system. The next morning, supervisors told staff that Raymond was no longer employed and that his final paycheck would be mailed. No mention of what happened, just a reminder about productivity expectations. Story 14. In the middle of a rooftop company party, with karaoke blasting and drinks flowing, my director told me to fire a guy who was still on the dance floor. I was a newly promoted team lead at a marketing firm when this happened. We had rented out a rooftop bar to celebrate landing a huge client. Open bar, catered food, neon company logo projected on a wall, the whole over-the-top corporate celebration package. About an hour in, while people were lining up to sing early 2000s pop songs, my director pulled me aside near the stairwell. She didn't even lower her voice much. "I need you to terminate Ben tonight," she said. Ben was one of my coordinators. Not a superstar, but solid. No write-ups, no warnings. He was on the dance floor 5 minutes earlier, laughing with his team. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Apparently, upper management had decided to streamline headcount after reviewing quarterly numbers that afternoon. The directive had come down mid-party, and my director believed the cleanest approach was to grab him outside, tell him he was done, and have security escort him out before the night ended. At a party that we invited him to, I just stared at her. Music thumping behind us, people cheering, someone butchering a song over the speakers. I told her I wouldn't do it there. Not with alcohol involved, not in front of his peers, not at an event meant to celebrate the team. She rolled her eyes and said I was being too sentimental. For the rest of the night, I couldn't relax. Every time Ben laughed, I felt sick knowing what was likely coming. I kept expecting my director to grab the mic and call his name. She didn't. I'll take a quick break here to remind you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. The following Tuesday, after the weekend, HR scheduled a formal meeting and let him go in a conference room at 9 a.m. It was still awful, but at least it wasn't public humiliation sandwiched between cocktail refills. Story 16. A few years ago, I was working for a mid-sized consulting firm. No drama, solid performance reviews, decent relationships with everyone. Then out of nowhere, I received a calendar invite titled Alignment Conversation Mandatory. No context, no prior issues, nothing. It felt off, so I forwarded it to the employee association rep we had on retainer and asked if she could sit in. She agreed. When I walked into the meeting room, my department head looked visibly irritated that I wasn't alone. She started by saying there had been multiple concerns about professionalism. I asked for specifics. She couldn't name dates, couldn't name witnesses, just vague language about patterns. My rep calmly asked for documentation. There was none. Then the tone shifted. Suddenly, the issue wasn't professionalism. It was inappropriate conduct. She claimed someone had reported that I'd been physically familiar with a coworker in the parking lot after work hours. I blinked. After some awkward silence, she clarified. Allegedly, I had hugged and kissed this coworker in a way that made others uncomfortable. My rep asked who the complainant was. It turned out the coworker in question was my fiancée. We had gotten engaged the month prior. The entire office knew. There were congratulations emails. The parking lot in question? After a team dinner celebrating our engagement. When my rep pointed that out, the department head pivoted again, claiming that regardless of relationship status, it could create a perception issue. The meeting stalled. My rep requested a short recess. In the hallway, she told me she'd rarely seen someone dig so recklessly for justification to terminate an employee without groundwork. When we went back in, my rep methodically dismantled every claim. No written complaints, no witnesses, no policy violation, just speculation layered on top of nothing. Within 15 minutes, the department head backed off entirely. Miscommunication, she called it. Story 17. He told us his father was dying in the ICU, but he was actually on a yacht building a rival company and stealing our celebrity client list. This wasn't some entry-level gig. I was operations manager for a private aviation maintenance company that serviced charter jets for celebrities and corporate clients. Small team, high trust, insane confidentiality rules. Everyone had background checks that felt like FBI interrogations. We hired this guy. I'll call him Darren. Early 30s, polished, sharp resume, former military aviation tech. He was good, not amazing, but dependable. Quiet, kept to himself, no red flags. About 8 months in, he comes to me shaking, says his father had a stroke back home overseas. Full tears. HR fast-tracks emergency leave. We all cover his shifts. In our world, if someone's out, someone else is sleeping on a cot in the hangar because jets don't care about your personal life. He's gone for weeks. Sends occasional updates. ICU, complications, family drama. We send flowers. We pull money. The owner even covers his travel expenses. Month 2, he says he needs extended leave. Provides medical documentation. Everything looks official. Legal clears it. Insurance kicks in partial pay. Meanwhile, we're drowning. FAA audit scheduled. 2 major clients threatening penalties over delayed turnarounds. My team is working 16-hour shifts rotating on call. Morale's shot. Then one of our line techs, young guy, always scrolling, goes quiet one night and just slowly turns his phone toward me. It's a public Instagram reel. A yacht, crystal water, electronic music blasting, champagne spray, and there's Darren, shirtless, grinning, very much not at a hospital bedside. Caption, 3 months building something of my own. Finally free. We dig deeper. He hadn't gone overseas at all. He'd rented a condo 2 hours down the coast. He'd registered a luxury boat charter company under his cousin's name. The medical paperwork came from a telehealth doctor who specialized in stress leave certifications. Darren had been using his paid leave to build a competing side business catering to the exact same high net worth clientele we serviced, offering VIP air-to-sea experiences. He was literally poaching our client contacts. One of our charter pilots had already been approached privately. We didn't confront him immediately. Legal wanted everything airtight. We hired a forensic accountant, subpoenaed business filings, cross-referenced client overlap, pulled access logs. He downloaded client contact databases 2 days before going on leave. The wildest part? He'd been emailing potential boat clients from the condo while simultaneously submitting weekly daily family hospital updates to HR. When he finally returned, sunburned, tanned, wearing a sympathy face, we scheduled a welcome back meeting. Room was me, owner, legal counsel, HR director. We projected his yacht video on the screen before he even sat down. I have never seen blood drain from a human face that fast. He tried to claim the video was old. Timestamp metadata said otherwise. Tried to say the business wasn't his. We had bank transfers. Tried to say he never contacted our clients. We printed emails. He was terminated on the spot for fraud, conflict of interest, data theft, and falsifying medical documentation. But that wasn't the messed up part. The messed up part was what followed. Our owner, who had once funded Darren's professional certifications, personally called every charter brokerage in our network. Aviation is small. Word spreads faster than jet fuel. Within 48 hours, his security credentials were revoked at 3 regional airports. Then the insurance company filed a civil claim for wage recovery. Then one of our biggest clients, who he had pitched his yacht service to, filed a lawsuit for misuse of confidential information. And then the FAA opened an inquiry because accessing controlled maintenance logs for non-company purposes can trigger regulatory violations. Last I heard, his boat was repossessed. The cousin whose name was on the LLC claimed identity misuse. That turned into another legal nightmare. He didn't just lose the job. He became radioactive in an industry that runs on trust and clearance badges. All because he couldn't just quit and start a boat business like a normal person. Story 18. I've been a union rep for public school staff for over a decade. 90% of my job is stopping administrators from panicking over nonsense. A kid lies, a parent overreacts, someone misinterprets sarcasm. We smooth it out. That's the rhythm. Then there was Mr. K. He transferred into our district mid-year from a large urban system. Resume was solid. 15 years teaching history. Master's degree. Glowing references. On paper, stable. In person, a walking disruption. First faculty meeting. He shows up in a floor-length leather trench coat. Indoors. In May. Dark sunglasses on his head like he's about to headline a DJ set. He introduces himself as a learning architect. The students adored him immediately. He had energy. I'll give him that. He redesigned his classroom to look like some kind of underground bunker. Maps pinned everywhere. Dramatic lighting. Speakers playing ambient battle sounds during lectures. Kids were suddenly debating geopolitics like it was a sport. Teachers complained about the noise. Admin told him to dial it back. He nodded. Didn't dial it back. The first formal issue? He staged a historical tribunal where he assigned a student to play a controversial dictator and had other students interrogate him. The roleplay got heated. A parent emailed the superintendent calling it psychologically reckless. I attended that meeting. He defended it as immersive pedagogy. We negotiated a written reminder about boundaries. No suspension. Fine. 2 weeks later, facilities called the principal because smoke was coming from his room. Not a fire, a fog machine. He had decided the Industrial Revolution unit needed atmosphere. Windows closed. Fog thick enough to set off a sensor in the adjacent hallway. Students posting videos captioned Silent Hill High School. Again, I'm in the room. Again, I'm trying to keep this salvageable. He insists experiential learning requires sensory buy-in. Admin issues a formal reprimand. He signs it, barely. At this point, I'm tired, but still think it's eccentricity, not career suicide. Then Spirit Week happened. Someone started circulating a clip in the staff group chat. It's vertical phone footage. Shaky. Loud. Mr. K is standing on top of a desk. Not metaphorically. Physically. He's holding what looks like a plastic prop sword from the drama department. The desks are arranged in a circle. The lights are dimmed again. Students are chanting something rhythmic. He announces they are about to recreate a siege scenario to understand power structures. Before I can even process that, 2 students start shoving each other in the center of the room while the rest form a ring. It's not playful. It's not supervised athletics. It's chaos. He's shouting encouragement like a sports announcer. A math teacher across the hall hears the noise, opens the door, and records the last 30 seconds, which includes Mr. K yelling, "History isn't passive." By the end of the day, that clip is everywhere. Parents are emailing before dismissal even starts. Emergency meeting gets called. Superintendent present. HR present. Me, unfortunately, present. They play the video on the projector. No one speaks for a full minute after it ends. When asked what he was thinking, he doesn't apologize. He launches into a monologue about disengaged youth and institutional rigidity. Says traditional classrooms are carceral. Says the physicality was symbolic. Admin asks why students were physically grappling. He says, controlled opposition sharpens intellect. There was no controlling happening. The kid with the busted lip sitting in the nurse's office would confirm that. I pull him aside during a break and say, quietly, "This is bad. This is very bad." He looks at me and says, "They're afraid of innovation." That's when I knew I couldn't spin this. This wasn't a paperwork misunderstanding. This wasn't a poorly worded comment. This was reckless supervision with minors on camera. They placed him on immediate leave pending investigation. Within a week, termination proceedings started fired for gross misconduct and unsafe classroom management. Story 19. This was years ago when I was bouncing between hospitality jobs trying to stay afloat. I landed a server position at a high-end hotel restaurant attached to a boutique property. Think marble floors, overly dramatic lighting, and management that spoke in hushed tones like they were planning a heist. It was my first fine dining gig. I was nervous but excited. Memorized the menu, learned the wine pairings, practiced describing entrees like I was narrating a nature documentary. I kept mostly to myself at first. Try not to step on toes. The kitchen crew had their rhythm, the bartenders had their clique, and the veteran servers had the prime tables. I was just trying to survive the probation period. About 3 weeks in, something small happened that I didn't even register as important. During a slow afternoon shift, a guy in street clothes walked through the side service entrance near the kitchen. That door was constantly swinging open. Vendors, maintenance guys, delivery drivers. He grabbed a soda from the server station cooler, nodded at me, and said he was with chef. I assumed he was staff. I was still learning faces. I went back to polishing cutlery. The next day, the general manager didn't greet me. That was odd because he loved dramatic eye contact. The assistant manager avoided me completely. The vibe felt off, like I'd walked into a room mid-argument. Mid-shift, I'm told to report to the conference room upstairs. Not the office, the conference room. Inside, GM, assistant manager, HR rep I'd never met, and the executive chef. They closed the door. The GM slides a printed still image across the table. It's a grainy security shot of the service hallway. Me at the silverware station. The guy from yesterday walking past. The GM asks, "Would you like to explain this?" I blink. Explain what? The chef leans forward and says that a delivery of imported Wagyu beef had gone missing. Not a small cut. An entire vacuum-sealed package worth thousands. They claim the man I saw wasn't staff. They say he entered through the service door, took product from the walk-in, and left within 4 minutes. And because I was the only employee visible on camera near that hallway during the window of time, they believed I facilitated the distraction. I actually laughed at first because it sounded absurd. I barely knew where the mop closet was, and they thought I'd orchestrated a meat heist. They didn't laugh. They said the timing was suspicious, that I had spoken to the individual, that I didn't challenge him, that I failed to follow security protocol. I explained exactly what happened. Guy grabbed a soda, said he was with chef. I assumed he worked there. The chef swore he'd never seen him before. They told me police could get involved. Used the word conspiracy. Said theft at that value could be a felony. My heart dropped into my shoes. Then HR slides a document in front of me. It states that I'm being terminated effective immediately for negligence contributing to loss of property. It also includes a clause waiving any claim to my final week's tips due to pending internal reconciliation. I asked to see the full footage. They said no. I asked if they had proof I took anything. They said the proof was that I didn't stop him. I was 22, broke, scared of legal trouble. I didn't know my rights. The idea of being dragged into some criminal investigation terrified me. So I signed. They handed me an envelope with my base pay minus uniform cleaning deductions. No tips, no apology. I left through the lobby in full uniform while guests sipped champagne 5 feet away. A week later, I heard through a former coworker that the missing beef had been logged into the wrong inventory column and was found in an auxiliary freezer used for banquet prep. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.